would we say, no, it's perfectly okay to have separate food services? None of this is mandated. Building maintenance would want to be discussed in there. Who owns what, who's responsible for what? Infrastructure and school management systems, and this is where it starts to get kind of boring, but yet day-to-day important. Technology and telephone. Do all the telephone systems work with each other? Do all the computers work with each other? Then looking at attendance reporting, human resources issues, how the transportation would work. We know that we would cover transportation, obviously, just as our current regional agreement does, but who would be in charge of contract schedules? That doesn't need to go into the regional agreement, but it's all something that we would need to work out as part of the transition plan. Collective bargaining agreement is developed, of course, by the regional school committee. They're currently in negotiations, and so that makes our timing here a little bit interesting. The current bargaining units and agreement remain in place until a new thing is created, and one assumes that retroactive pay increases may need to occur because salary levels are higher in some of our current elementary schools than they are in others. So, racing through that, because we definitely want to get to your questions, and we know many of you have been to a longer presentation, is the next steps after today's discussion is we've already had meetings in Shutesbury and Leverett this week. Pelham's having one even as we speak. Next week, as Catherine mentioned at the beginning, we will have a board meeting, 12 people, and in fact we'll be in this room, as I recall, and we will be deciding then what to do. Is it time to walk away, or is it time to continue to work on this? If we vote to proceed, we have a lot of documentation we have to come up with. We have more public meetings we need to have because we'll need your continual input on those documents. And then eventually there would be one question on the ballot in the fall. It isn't like some other questions you're allowed to do in towns where you can have an either or a pyramid option or anything like that. There's just one question. So it would have to be a question that obviously all 4 towns, representatives to the Regional School District Planning Board, thought was a really good plan because they thought it was going to pass in all 4 towns. One last thing I want to mention before I turn it back to Catherine for questions is, again, mention regionalschoolplanning.com, where all these documents do appear and will continually be updated. That's the place to look, although we do try and get information up on the main school website. We can't control that. We're all volunteers, so we're trying to just, do it on our own website, regionalschoolplanning.com. And of course, meetings are all legally posted with the individual town clerks in the individual towns. And yeah, I forgot, so let's go.
Thank you, Andy and Alyssa. So now I think we'll open it up for questions and comments. I encourage people to move forward. And I will ask that if you have a question you're going to ask us now, today, that you ask it in the microphone, you address it, you identify yourselves, and if you would rather write your questions down, we can collect them and answer them today, or certainly put them up on the website and answer them on the website. So.
I'm going to ask people to identify themselves.
Yes, and please identify yourself. And we are limiting today to Amherst residents. Questions and comments. So, are there?
Can you just speak up?
For the Amherst media, I'm sorry, Mary Lou, I think you actually have to speak into the microphone. Thanks.
Just like town meeting.
Yeah.
Speak into the mic. Just like at town meeting.
Okay. Mary Lou Tileman, Precinct 7. Alyssa, I'd like you to explain a little bit more about the voting by representatives. I think it's the third one, by town, so many from each town. Is it possible with that process to vote everyone in from Shutesbury or Leverett or Pelham or Amherst? How do we know how many people from each town would serve on this board of so many? That's not clear, and if it is so many by town, do we then get back to proportional representation?
That's a great question. I have not gotten a concrete developed answer to that yet. In looking at, we were talking about the district-wide elections, right? And we're talking about partly the difference between, so you're not referring to the situation where it's decided that we have a 7-member school committee, random number, not a real number.
Right.
it was decided we have a 7-member school committee, and the votes are open to all 4 towns, but the candidates are open to all 4 towns too. So in theory, maybe nobody would run for some of the towns, and everybody gets to vote for all the reps. So it's completely kind of randomized at large, as opposed to 3, which is residency requirements, which I think part of your question is, how do we decide how many seats are for, we still have to work out how many seats are for Pelham, Leverett, Shutesbury, and Amherst. And then those people all, assuming, say we said it was 3, let's just go with that, just for fun. So if it was 3 per town, across the board, we'd say there were that many representatives across the board, and then people would have to turn in papers just like they do now in each individual town, and everybody, when they went to the poll, they would see, these 3 people are running from Pelham, these 7 people are running from Shutesbury. This one person is the only person running from Leverett this year, and all 4 towns would get to pick would elect people from all those areas. So it'd be sort of like, just try and compare it to our town, with town meeting reps. Instead of only voting for the reps in your precinct, you vote for the reps in all the precincts, but they'd still be precinct reps.
How does that meet the one man, one vote?
Do you have a better answer? Okay.
Yeah, I was looking for certain papers to see if I could find it, but I can't right now do that. It complies with one person, one vote. The legal context for those of you who are really into this, and I can provide some other point citations for people who are really desirous of getting into the weeds on this question. There was a U.S. Supreme Court case out of Kansas City Junior College District, Hadley versus Junior College District, that I think was in the 1970s. That was what was said that these kinds of elections that we're talking about have to comply with one person, one vote. And then there was a second case in Massachusetts that was Brockton versus the vocational school district in that area that asked for an application of that one person, one vote principle. And the that particular decision out of the First Circuit in the Brockton, Massachusetts case created the 5 characterizations. It said these are examples of what can legally be done in compliance with one person, one vote. And the legislature then chose just to adopt that section of the legal opinion from the First Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals and make it a statute, and that's where Section 14E comes from of Chapter 71. So there's no question, it's been through the courts, that the option of having all voters in a region vote on the members, regardless of how those members are allocated, complies with one person, one vote, because everybody's getting a vote. Every voter is getting a vote, and that vote is counted equally. So the fact that you could, under that, and I'm not saying we would, but I'm just going to throw this out as an example because it's really what you're getting at. A 4-person committee, 1 from each town. Everybody votes on it. Amherst voters all vote, as do everybody else in the same pool. That would actually constitute, under what has been decided by the courts, as one person, one vote. Does that mean that the 3 of us, if we're negotiating, would think that that's a reasonable approach to take? Not necessarily, but it does constitute one person, one vote.
Janet, do you want to come up to me?
I'm just going to talk. So right now we have an Amherst Elementary School Committee that's all Amherst residents on the school committee focusing on Amherst Elementary students. So in that scenario, we would lose that, a lot of representation and control, focus on the curriculum and needs of those students, and I think pay more into a regional system. So what's the benefit at the elementary level to going to a regional model? We could lose representation, we're paying more. What do we get for our students?
You wanna handle this?
You can start.
So, I actually wanted to start out by saying that in the future, you've asked a very interesting question, and we are doing this both for people here and for people at home, and I'm afraid that your question, which was very well stated, was lost to the people who are watching at home in Amherst Media, and so I would encourage future people to, as you're making comments, to do as Mary Lou did, and come up to the microphone, not for the people here, but for the Amherst Media audience. So if I don't, Catherine doesn't correctly summarize in response what you just said, then I encourage you to please come forward and correct us and supplement. With that, I mean, the basic question was, what is there to gain? Because we need to recognize that currently Amherst, and I think that this actually applies to all towns, have school committees that are directly elected from the town and focus on the elementary schools of the town, and that moving to a region, we would no longer have a school committee that is focusing on the educational needs that are particular to the community itself. Is that a fair statement?
And then we pay more. I mean, we're paying more into a regional model than we're paying currently, I think.
Okay, the second point is just being made, and again, I really do encourage people to come forward, but what was just said is, and we would pay more. Whether we would pay more, again, gets back to the question of what assessment formula works out in the end, so that it's not necessarily the end result that we would pay more. Hopefully, we would take that $250,000 in reduction, find a way, a formula that would equitably divide it amongst the 4 towns in going forward, that our contribution to elementary education would be essentially or very close to what it is now. So I would take back or at least carefully consider that question of paying more part. As far as the balance between the representation on the school committee versus the gains, I think that that's the question, that a large part of the question that we're examining. One of the things that was noted earlier is that school committees have really changed because of education reform. The State Education Reform Act has significantly reduced what it is that school committees can do, and has shifted a lot of what was traditionally the role of school committees to the superintendents and principals. And so that the number of policies and curriculum decisions and hiring decisions that can be affected by a school committee are significantly different than they were when the current system was created. And then the other part of it, and I'm going to let Catherine speak to it, is that it's then a question of whether the other advantages to regionalization are so beneficial that it balances out against this one question that you have raised and has been raised in other communities about school committees.
Right, I think some of the advantages I talked about at the beginning of the presentation and that the educational consultant really emphasized was this issue of increased flexibility for elementary schools in terms of resources, and some of those resources, most importantly, those resources being teachers coming into our professional development, embedded professional development with our teachers. I think also, even though all elementary schools in the state are going to have to align with the Common Core curriculum, regionalization would help with implementation of that, with the way in which all students in the region are presented the curriculum. And one of the most compelling reasons, in speaking with the principal of the middle school, Betsy Dinger, she spoke to our board, she really talked about the difficulties that incoming 7th graders at the regional level have, and the teachers have, getting all kids on board in the same place, using the same language, who have had such diverse experiences in their elementary schools around curriculum, around use of language, even if the curriculum is the same. And teachers and administrators at the middle school really feel like they take months getting kids to a place where they can start introducing new curriculum. So this would really help at that level, introducing new curriculum very early on when kids got to 7th grade. Everybody knows, everybody's using the same language, everybody has seen the same curriculum, presented differently perhaps. I mean, I think one of the concerns that I've heard is that, well, all teachers will now have to be in lockstep. And that's not true. The curriculum will be the same. There will be collaboration between teachers. But one of the significant benefits to kids when teachers collaborate is that they determine among themselves, across grades and between grades, how can we best introduce this material to students, so that no longer will it be the case that parents have to worry, well, if my kid gets this teacher, I have to worry that they're not going to get this part of the curriculum, or that this isn't this particular teacher's preference, they don't like teaching X topic, and so they focus elsewhere. This really ensures that all kids are going to have access to the best instructional practice.
Can I answer your question that has just, oh, okay, I'll do it. What I don't understand about that is that for 20 years we've had the Massachusetts frameworks, and every grade is supposed to be learning the same material in every school in Massachusetts. So I don't really see, like, are we not doing that already? Is Shutesbury teaching different stuff in 6th grade and 5th grade than Amherst? Aren't all the Amherst schools teaching the same stuff? Don't we know what's going to be taught in 7th grade? Like, this is the state that has led that battle.
I agree.
So the Common Core actually looks like our framework. So I don't know what.
It does,
This kind of-
it's more specific than the frameworks.
And have we been following them as
I
communities?
think people have, but you know, there's issues of when teachers are not collaborating together, you know, there are issues of fidelity. There's, you know, the curriculum can be introduced, but it's not necessarily introduced in the depth that
So the
another
Shutesbury
classroom.
elementary 5th grade teachers will collaborate with Crocker Farm,
Yeah,
and the Crocker Farm, Fort River, and Wildwood teachers are already doing that. So how does
They are
it help
starting.
Amherst? Like, how does it help our district? Like, what
I
are the
think we're
improvements to
bringing in
us?
additional teachers to that process, very talented teachers to that process. I think it will help Amherst 6th graders transition to the 7th grade more smoothly and ensure that they'll get curriculum, new curriculum sooner. I also think that we need to think from an Amherst point of view educationally about sustaining what we have and enhancing it, both from a financial point of view, but also from an educational point of view. And as I talked about earlier, for example, there are lots of parents and community members who would love to see an immersion program. We can't do that right now. Alignment is sort of is taking precedent. But if we had more flexibility in a larger region, that might be something we could consider, or a preschool
I don't
for
wanna argue it, but I've been hearing about alignment, curricular alignment for 10 years since we've moved here. And so I don't know why adding some more towns would help that. Why does that effort fail in the elementary schools, or is it working? We pay a lot of money for our students. I just don't see the direct benefits in any way to, I mean, I'd be happy to see benefits, but, you know, are we so focused on curricular alignment? Why haven't we gotten there? And does regionalization get us there? We have the same superintendent, you know, K
I don't know that
through 12 already.
regionalization gets
But-
us there, but I think it enhances, it will enhance our students' experience, and I think it will enhance, so,
How?
because all the students will be, all the teachers and administrators will be working towards the same alignment. We'll be collaborating together. I don't know if I'm not being clear, but we'll be collaborating together so that teachers in Shutesbury are working with teachers in Amherst, so that all the kids in the region are being introduced to the same curriculum, and teachers are talking about how best to introduce it, and what language are we all using to introduce it. And so I think it will enhance it. I mean, I could speak, I don't think sort of what's been going on over the last 10 years in terms of alignment is, I mean, I don't know what was
Because we-
happening
we've had
prior,
this-
but over the last few years,
Yeah, but in Amherst, we have the same administrators, you know, K through 12 already. And so we'll have the same administrators. I'm looking for something that will help. You know, but anyway, that's just, I don't wanna belabor it.
No, I think that actually, if I understand it, and give me, correct me if I'm wrong, but the point you're making is that our students and Pelham students have the benefit of having the same superintendent, the same director of curriculum,
Special ed,
curriculum,
yeah, we have all
special
that
ed,
stuff, yeah.
going through from elementary school, and of course, we're recognizing that Leverett and Shutesbury don't, but sort of there's a two-edged sword then to the question, I would think. One is, but we already have that coordination, so what do we have to gain by Leverett and Shutesbury
I mean,
getting the same level of coordination?
Are those students holding the whole classes behind in seventh
Betsy
grade?
Dinger,
Probably not.
who's the principal now at the middle school, did meet with us, as Catherine mentioned, and she talked about that some. She said, yes, the Common Core curriculum does help, that the same basic content is taught, but that there are differences in what she called language, and that there's some cultural and language pieces that it takes time when all of the students reach seventh grade to sort of bring that commonality in place. That happens in seventh grade. It takes effort in seventh grade. That if there was better coordination in sixth grade and in the upper levels of elementary, it would flow better. And the other example that she gave, though she was not trying to suggest that it was a large issue, but it said something to think about, was that it puts the awkward situation in place that some students, for example, in a literature program, will be picking up books in seventh grade that they've actually already read in elementary schools, where other students have not had exposure to those books, and so it creates this inherent tension and difficulty that it exists now. So, you know,
and I just wanna, I wanna also add that one of the things that she said, and I have heard from people in the high school, is that even though it's most marked in seventh grade, it does carry through into high school. These differences in elementary schools.
So the Leverett and Shutesbury kids are learning in a different language and reading different books, and so when they come in, there's a disconnect when the Amherst kids come in, because they're coming into a coherent system, so it's to align those two groups. I mean, I got the impression that a lot of the Amherst kids are behind and lagging, and that might be
It's
part of
not
it
even a
too.
matter of being behind or ahead, it's just a matter of being in different places. And that is true of Amherst Elementary Schools as well, which Amherst is clearly working on now.
Mhm.
So, you know, I really hesitate to talk about any one group holding another group back, but rather, the differences coming into seventh grade, it just takes a really long time for people, for all the students to, be using some, common experience and common language. And that this, as I said, is seen in smaller effects going through high school as well.
I just want to say, as we move forward with this, meeting forward to next Saturday, short term, if we were to decide to move forward on Saturday to continue, I agree that more of this needs to be fleshed out in terms of understanding, because this is something that's in our frequently asked questions as well. It's something that's continuing to come up, because not only the shorthand of what's in it for Amherst, but in terms of this alignment issue with core curriculum, with the frameworks, et cetera. And I think there's a fundamental trust issue based on past practice. Well, what you see right now, and you're saying, well, I don't think it's aligned right now, and why isn't it? Versus why that might change in the future. And so I think that there's more detail that will need to be provided with the education from our educational, to hear it from Maria and our other educational experts. We heard some specific examples from Betsy that helped us understand when they were talking about, I don't have it in front of me, but what the same math curriculum, but they used different words with that same curriculum, which seems strange to me because it's one curriculum, right? But they used different words to talk about the math frame. So when kids got to the middle school, they said, "Oh, what you mean is you're talking about this." And once they made those translation connections, it made sense. Certainly, what we've been doing, obviously people want to, do look to our past as to whether or not we're continuing to succeed. And I think so there is some further discussion to be had around that. And I take your point, and we will consider that going forward. And if we decide to move forward, I agree that there needs to be more information about that produced before anyone can feel like they can make an actual decision as to whether or not this is the best thing for all our kids. I don't have an answer for you now that's a commitment that X, Y, and Z for sure will happen. Right now, these are all possibilities.
I just don't, I'm just wondering, is there other, it's a very different population in Amherst. They are in basically a regional system. These models look like they're gonna be more expensive for us. So what's the benefit to our kids? I mean, are they not knowing the language of seventh grade math when they leave our elementary schools? That could be fixed, or I would assume they already know it, so maybe they're the ones who aren't having the problems with that. But I just think I don't see the concrete benefits to our group, and I'd be happy to see them. It doesn't look like there's much savings, or it probably will cost us more, which is almost inevitable in our school district. But thank you.
Michael.
Michael Jakes. I don't actually have a question, I just have a statement. Obviously, you guys have spent hours and hours and hours to get to this point now. And based on the charts we saw earlier, you see the different governance structures, the reporting and everything else. There's a lot of work that goes on to report to the state, for school committees to meet. And it's obvious that a lot of time savings and simplification can be reached if we go with a K through 12 district versus K through 6, and then having 7 through 12 and having two different regions. So my point is this: if you're going to vote to move forward, in order to focus the committee and all their work, I would truly recommend that this town go forward with only K-12. And if there's a push to go K-6, I really don't think it's worth our time to do this process once to K-6. And then again, in 5 or 10 years, someone say, why do we have two different regional districts? Why didn't we just make this one 10 years ago? If we're gonna do it, either just let it go and forget about it, or just do a K-12 and get it done. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Demeline. I have a statement and a question. I see huge inequities already between our Amherst elementary schools and how we do things, and I find that we have a very people-dependent system, and I'd actually look for more standardization as a parent, between experiences from school to school. And I'm hoping that that's something that regionalization can address and make it easier to move forward with. As the middle school PGO chair, I do see a huge difference between experiences kids having in elementary school and what enrichment teachers need to provide on just a parent level to bring those kids to a common place. So I do agree with regionalization on that. I also think that the budget is so convoluted at times that I know I can spend hours looking at it and not comprehend the different facets. And I'm wondering if in the new budget process that could happen from regionalization, whether our reporting standards would change so that we could understand it in a more comprehensive way as community members, the process. So I'd like that to be considered in one of the avenues. And then there's one thing about this budget I don't quite understand. The Medicare reimbursement seems to be what makes regionalization more expensive for Amherst and the loss of that money. So I'd like to understand whether the other school districts use the Medicare reimbursements and how Amherst uses those Medicare adjustments now and what it would look like in the future.
Actually, you phrased it on the first part, good question that I have a follow-up question that you might help me with. But to get to the Medicare quickly first, Medicare reimbursement is something that is provided for certain medical expenses that are incurred by districts where there are significant medical needs of children. And there are reimbursements, as I mentioned earlier, going to all 4 towns, and the difference really is how we account for it versus how the other 3 towns account for it, not the question of it existing. So that the Medicare money does come back for the amount that's paid. It's just a much smaller amount of money because they're much smaller districts to the other 3 towns and goes directly into the elementary school budgets. We take that money, put it into the town money budget, and as I mentioned, the town then gives that much and a whole lot more to support the elementary school. So it all ends up getting back into the elementary budget. It was just a question that was pointed out by several of us that because there is that difference in accounting methodology, something needed to be done to clarify what the true cost is, because $200,000 for Amherst was a significant enough amount that it needed to be reported accurately. But it is going to all 4 towns. You were talking about bringing the schools, the elementary schools together and more commonality amongst the elementary schools. And I found that comment interesting because one of our regional planning board members from one of the other towns has actually kind of made a flip argument, and that is that she sees that we're losing a lot of children in all of the districts to charter schools, to homeschooling, to school choice, and to other private schools, and that it is to our advantage in most of those to bring those kids back into the schools, and it would be a richer schools if we did so, and that diversity of programming amongst the schools would create opportunities if we could use regionalization as a mechanism that would allow us to create a special program in arts or science or whatever at a school that might be attractive to hold the interest of child and staying in the system. And that seemed counter to what you were saying, and I wasn't sure, so that's why I wanted to ask.
I do agree each school needs to have their own flavor, and I think the PGOs have the potential to provide that, what type of socials they do or what type of activities they do. What I more see a discrepancy is, studying the Industrial Revolution. A school or 2 might go to Lowell and visit museums and other things that help them develop a richer understanding, where other schools don't have that. where you look at some students routinely go to the Museum of Science in Boston as a yearly field trip, where other students do not. We're not providing the same basic, mainly in field trips and things like that, where kids have an ability to go deeper into a subject and make it more engaging for them. I see a discrepancy between the schools, and as a 6th grade parent at Crocker, I've been working with Derek Shea, and he's been fabulous about, you know what, 6th grade at Crocker does one field trip, and it's typically been to Lake Compounds, which is not going to Lowell or going to the Boston Museum of Science and doing a duck tour. And I look at those inequities, and I look at the populations of a 40% low income, and I think we're missing an opportunity to get all kids a more shared experience that they connect with other kids. And I'd like to see that kind of happen between. But as a former PGO chair at Crocker, I liked being able to give it a personality and a flavor that kind of was my own because I was the chair and hey, I could do that. But I do agree that flavors of schools make it more appealing, but there has to be a common educational foundation that's just not individual PGOs being able to fund one field trip over another, or having teachers who are motivated or know how to provide those additional experiences to kids outside of the core curriculum standards, because I think that creates too much discrepancy between how much kids understand about a particular topic versus another.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing this up, Becky, and I think, I mean, obviously, this is not, these would not be things determined by a regional agreement, but by a school committee, by a superintendent. But there is that fine line, you're right, about aligning curriculum, keeping each school's uniqueness, but also, this question specifically about field trips, and I know it's come up, you're bringing up today, and I've heard it from other parents about, should they all be the same or not? Is it something that adds to a particular school's uniqueness or not? And so, those would be things, I think, going forward that we would really have to talk more about. But I appreciate you bringing it up. And I just want to quickly address the budget issue, because as you well know, this last discussion about budget issues at the elementary school in Amherst there has been tons of confusion. And I think one of the things that regionalization would help with enormously is that currently, when you look at an Amherst elementary school budget, there will be pieces of things in certain lines, because some employees are, or some teachers, even teachers are parts of different budgets. And a regional, if we had a regional budget, K-12, obviously it would just be one budget, so each line would be fully represented. And I think that alone would make it a more transparent process, and certainly less complicated.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes.
Hi, first of all, full disclosure, and you can tell me to sit down, I am a Leverett resident, but I do have a general question about regional agreements, if that's all right.
Well, we really
Or
are
should I
trying to
not?
limit this to Amherst residents.
Okay.
If we could just see if the other Amherst.
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
see if
No
there are other
problem.
Amherst
Thank
people.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you for admitting it.
Yes.
No problem.
Are there other Amherst residents who would like to make a comment or ask a question?
Okay, one more.
Okay,
You
Michael.
wanna go? No, you go first, I already went.
Good morning, my name is Jay Barry. I just wanted to comment briefly that I've been impressed by the amount of work that this planning board has done. Put a lot of information together, and also to reiterate a comment that was made earlier, that it does seem to me also that as you look at the March 9th decision, that the K-12 option seems, after all the work that's been done, the more appropriate point of focus than another pre-K-6. And it seems to me that there's a lot of opportunities in front of the communities if you do regionalize, and that the benefits for each town need to be there, but the benefits aren't going to be identical for each town. So good luck with your work and your vote on the 9th.
Thank you very much. Diana?
I'm considering, or wondering about, I'm Diana Stein, sorry. My concern is the buildings and the chance of getting reimbursement for Fort River and for Wildwood, which we know desperately need work. And I understand that we're low in priority in terms of getting state funding because there are other schools in much poorer districts that are in much worse shape. Is there really evidence that going to regionalization would improve our chances for getting that funding?
The answer is yes, but then the follow-up question is how much of a difference would it make? And that's the harder one to answer, and what makes it difficult to say that it would be worth taking a step to regionalize for that reason alone. There is a list of considerations that the Mass School Building Authority has for what are considered as factors in making decisions about a school building application. One of which is being part of a region, but because they are not ordered or quantified, and there's insufficient experience to go back and look at it, we don't know. And there have been situations where schools have actually regionalized for the major purpose of getting new school building construction done. And the state is actually, in its role of trying to encourage regionalization, has dangled that out there as an incentive, but it's not clear when it's in elementary schools in the situation that we're in that they will do that. And I have attempted that conversation with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and I don't have anything that will help me clarify my answer further than I already have answered it.
A second very minor point, I'm not sure whether I was hearing correctly, but it's Medicaid, not Medicare. I
Right.
think there was some slippage there, and I just
Yeah.
want to make
Yeah.
it clear to the listening audience.
But you know, Diana, your question actually prompted me to say something that I failed to say earlier in my presentation, which is one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that this group formed and we were appointed by town meeting in 2011 is that several years ago, the state was considering forcing districts to form together as regions. There was a lot of pushback around that, and so they dropped that. The state pulled back a bit, but I and I think other members of the board feel like sometime in the future there will be a push again by the state. Right now, the state is just encouraging it, and that's what, sort of potential incentives, new schools in some regions. But this is an opportunity for us, if we decide to go forward, to do it on our own terms as opposed to something imposed by the state. And just in terms of the Mass School Building Authority, as Andy was pointing out, there may be some increased chance that we would get renovations for those buildings, but what is sure is that we would get increased percentage points as a region, meaning we would, if we qualify and if they decide to give us state money, we would get more.
And I just want to thank you. I think the presentations today were very clear and very helpful, and you guys have worked really hard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just wanted to do a quick follow-up, even though I have made an attempt to never say anything even slightly negative about any of this process. When it comes to the school building issue, I just don't want the listening audience to believe that either one, Fort River and Wildwood are falling apart, because they aren't. There are long-term HVAC issues there that make things difficult, but kids are happy, healthy, functioning, everything's great, roof's not caving in. Yet, we are on a list, because we wanna be on a list, we continually put in these new things, and as Catherine pointed out, we'll get additional percentage points, but how soon it'll take us to get up to the top of the list, so if eventually this does come to a vote, I hope you won't feel like you're voting for it just to get Fort River and Wildwood renovated, because that might not be the reason to vote for this.
Becky and then Michael, or Mike. Okay, Michael and then Becky.
I just wanted to clarify a point. Andy, you made a comment about regionalization could possibly try to bring back students who have left the district, and why I think that's wonderful, and there are a lot of other benefits. The reality on the ground is my kids are out of the district currently, and no one from the district, no administrator has ever asked us why we left, what we could have done to keep our kids in the district, what they could do to change the district. So I'm not really sure that the administration has any of that in mind to bring anybody back at this point. Would they like to? Sure, but they're not certainly working towards that goal at this point. Thank you.
I wanted to make a clarifying statement, and then thinking about the equity issue between the schools. It doesn't mean eliminate, like Crocker Farm has a garden that we just built. That's a wonderful asset to the school. I know Leverett has a greenhouse program. I'm not talking about eliminating those things. I'm more trying to create a base level of standardization. But to that end, what process will regionalization use, and I assume it's through the school committee, to address which programs are kept, which are eliminated? And also I'd like to know if this will bring back open enrollment, whether Leverett and Shutesbury and Pelham and other schools could bring back intra-district open enrollment as part of this, because I think that was something that people really appreciated having, that gave families more flexibility, whether that could potentially come back as part of this. And what's my other question? How does this affect school choice dollars that come into the district, and do you anticipate a change with school choice?
So I can address the first two. I did understand what you were talking about, and those kinds of unique things. I mean, part of this process, the board has had the opportunity to have meetings and meet with principals in all 6 elementary schools, and I have been struck by the wonderful individual things, the greenhouse, the gardens, the celebrations that are part of individual schools that I don't think anybody has any intention of doing away with. And I'm just, your second comment.
Open enrollment.
Oh,
and school choice.
so that would be, that, I've heard that a lot. I don't know what would happen. It would not be something that would be in the regional agreement. That, again, would be a decision, that would be made ultimately by the new regional school committee. You know, I don't know how that will go, but it is something that I've heard a lot about, or potentially, you know, some flexibility in line so that some kids in North Amherst could go to Leverett, or, so in terms of school choice dollars, I'll let Andy talk a little bit more about that, but certainly on the face of it, if you're within the region, there would no longer, people going, for example, Amherst kids who go to Pelham, or Leverett kids who come to Amherst, that would no longer be considered school choice.
3 of the 4 towns are now accepting school choice students, and in percentage of the school, by far Pelham has the largest number of school choice kids. It's about almost half of their school is now school choice. So that school choice is a significant question, and the dollars, it's sort of those things that the dollars really aren't that great. It's only $5,000 per student, which is not the cost of education. The reason the schools bring the school choice is because it brings in additional revenue for the classroom that they've already decided that they're going to have, and it has empty seats, so that at that point it's a matter of bringing in the additional students. To the extent when we look at Pelham, I'll use them as an example to respond to what you just were asking and see if it is a response. Pelham has school choice students from a number of different towns, including Amherst. And for the kids who come to Pelham from Amherst, if they continue at the Pelham school, and it's likely that that would be a logical decision that a school committee would make, though we can't bind the school committee, then that's no longer school choice money, but it wouldn't really need to be, because you wouldn't have a need anymore to transfer from one to another, because it's all part of the same regional district. The school choice, to the extent that they decided at the school committee level that it made sense to still bring in additional students into Pelham, and they were going from outside the district, the school choice would work exactly as it has now, and it would probably be made by school committees on an annual basis as far as space available, and whether there's predictable ability to make that commitment to once the child comes into the school, to keep the child in the school going forward, and that calculation would have to be made each year, but choice would only apply to students who are coming from outside of the four towns, if it was a four-town district.
One follow-up question. Do you see a need for redistricting? I know a good school system looks at redistricting every so many years to look at enrollment trends and populations within different schools. Do you see a need for redistricting with regionalization happening concurrently?
I don't think it's a given at all. I think that, years from now, if, one thing to remember is that Leverett, Shutesbury, and Pelham have beautiful new buildings. And so, if at some point down the road there was a feeling that lines might be redrawn so that we could utilize those buildings fully, I guess that's a possibility. But again, it's not something that would be automatic at all. And not something that would be considered certainly out of the box if we decided to regionalize. I just think it increases flexibility sometime down the road, should that be the case.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Catherine, can I just
Yes.
follow up real quick? So at this point, and to follow up on what Catherine just said, we have not, and we would continue to discuss this obviously where we decide to move forward on March 9th. But there is at this point no expressed intention to cover in the regional agreement that Pelham's kids only go to Pelham and that level of specificity hasn't been discussed. Now, some other region somewhere, that might be part of their need to put that in a regional agreement. But again, that would be, as far as we can tell at this point, part of the school committee. One of the things that we've tried to do, and best laid plans and all that, we do have this frequently asked questions on the website, which in fact covers these particular items because we still don't know an answer. It's still in process, and a lot of it's going to be up to a future school committee. And we're working on, maybe a more user-friendly version of this that's kind of a chart, sort of what some of our slides had up here. Where will this appear? When will this get decided in terms of time frame and whose responsibility it is? Because as you've noticed, a lot of the things that are particularly interesting to people are not things that end up in a regional agreement. They end up in discussion at a future regional school committee.
I just want to point out that we have about 20 minutes left in our forum, so just
I want to follow up on hers. You can follow up on.
Mary Lou, do you want to
Okay,
follow
yes,
up on
I'd
this
like to
and then Sean?
So as part of a follow-up, it is possible that rather than closing one of the schools in the hill towns, where there are declining enrollments, it's possible that one of Amherst schools could be closed and our children going to one of the hill towns. That was brought up at a board meeting at one point. So, I mean, a new committee would decide that because that cannot be in the new regional agreement. Is that correct?
Well, yes, although we don't even know how that would be decided. Would it be decided, I mean, I guess it would be decided by the committee if that were ever to be the case. And as Alyssa pointed out, there would be a variety of ways in which that process could and would happen, if that were the case.
I think we need to clarify the difference between possibly redrawing the lines, which is one thing, to fill up a school that's more
Right.
empty-ish, as opposed to closing
Yeah.
an actual building, which would be something, the closure would be in the agreement, like we talked about. Redrawing lines could be, if we don't prevent it in the agreement, as I believe at this point we would not intend to prevent it, then that could be a regional school committee discussion, just like redistricting was within Amherst a few years ago.
So redistricting could take our children to the hill towns, Amherst children to the hill towns.
If that made sense to the regional school committee.
Okay,
yes.
that's all right. And two, we were talking about choice in or what is it? Yes, choice in, choice schools. So Pelham right now has, as an example, they have a large number of choice in, and some of those children are from Amherst. When an assessment will be made in a new district, will the children who are choice in those particular towns be considered part of the enrollment for assessment purposes? Or will they, because we're now all one, will Amherst kids in Pelham still be considered Amherst children? I mean, because that does have a lot to do with your assessment numbers. And I agree with everyone here, if you're doing a region, it should be pre-K to 12. You've done a lot of work, so I value that. But anyway, I don't know if you have the answer to that question.
I don't know the answer because it's not something that we've really explored yet. I believe, and somebody should correct me if I'm wrong on this, that the current 5-year rolling average does not include the choice in students. It includes students who are residents of the district.
So then,
Well, actually, at the elementary level, there is no,
No, I'm thinking of the 7-12.
other seven.
yeah, but I think that's, in terms of the numbers, it has a great deal to do with the assessments. If we still have a large number of children in Pelham, and then they're only going to pay for their in-town kids, then Amherst has those children to count. It's Amherst kids in its own enrollment, but it's something to think about. You don't need to do that today. And finally, the school committees generally agree on policies and all that. The two big issues that I don't want people to forget is that the school committee is in charge of hiring the superintendent and also in approving the budget. And those are big items for Amherst. So as Andy knows, I've been for proportional representation from day one and will continue to be till we finish. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary Lou. John?
Thank you. John Musanti, Amherst Town Manager, and I want to first start by thanking all of you for hundreds of hours, if not more, on this process so far. And in particular to Andy Steinberg for his incredible service as chair of this effort. Couple of observations. I think it's been a very helpful forum, a lot of good questions and comments, I think you did a nice job laying out the kind of the big picture issues, some of the educational considerations and some of the financial kind of snapshot things. I think to the extent that the group decides to proceed in the weeks and months ahead, trying to give more
context to the educational benefits in particular. You know, to the extent you can provide specific examples, you know, at the elementary level, middle school, high school level, that would be helpful. I think the administrative part of this, to me, as a municipal administrator, I think are very clear. That may not be what get people all excited to jump up and down and go vote yes or no on this thing, but it's an important thing in that that allows the educational leaders that you hire to lead your schools to spend most of their time not filling out reports for some bureaucrat down in Boston, but focusing on the strategic educational plan that serves each of our kids. Financially, I think the report so far has been helpful in terms of a snapshot. There are savings to be had, but that would not be a primary reason, I think, to consider, but they're real. I think from the collective judgment so far, getting more state money for busing in a regional model is worth over $2.5 million to the 4 communities over the next 10 years. That's not an insignificant amount. I think the longer term consideration though financially is this whole sustainability thing. That's a very hard thing to try to explain, but that would also urge the group to think about how you might look at that if you were to proceed forward. What does it mean if collectively all of the communities in the region are in a better position in their ability to pay longer term? How does that affect the educational outcome and opportunity for each of the kids from all of the 4 towns, including Amherst, we're trying to serve? So I don't have any magic answers this morning, but I think those are all important considerations, and I'm very curious myself to kind of do the numbers on, we know with or without regionalization, Amherst faces capital costs, not unique to, but at least at Fort River and Wildwood, in the many millions of dollars. You know, we don't need a big study committee to conclude that. There will be millions and millions of dollars worth of work needed at both of those schools. To the extent that taxpayers across the Commonwealth contribute a greater share of those costs than Amherst taxpayers exclusively, it would be interesting to run that, you know, very preliminary estimate of what those savings might be, because they're real, because of how we would likely pay for such an effort at the local level. So I think the effort has great potential, and I just want to appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you, John, and thank you for your comments. And just to know that if we should decide to move forward with this effort next week, I would, and I think our committee would have public forums at which the educational leaders would be here to answer those questions, the superintendents and administrators, who could answer certainly the educational piece much more thoroughly than I did today. But I agree with you. That would be a very important piece moving forward. Rick.
Rick Hood, Amherst School Committee. Speaking a little bit to what John said earlier, and also an issue raised earlier about how we can align better to the Common Core. There are many ways to align to the Common Core. Different curricula can align to the Common Core, but do it very differently. And also that curricula can be taught differently. So I think we've been lacking in Amherst with doing things the same way between schools and between classrooms. And I think that we've needed to boost our management of curriculum, management of how we do things in the classroom, which we've done. But I think that regionalization could provide more time because of the simplification and more money possibly to keep what we've done going and perhaps even expand it. So I look at anything we can save in time and money by regionalizing could be put more toward curriculum development and standardization and how that's actually taught in the classroom.
Thank you. So we're running out of time. Are there other Amherst residents who would like to make a comment or ask a question? Yes.
Hi, I'm Tracy Zafin, I live in Amherst. And my question was with the vote, and maybe this is premature, but what if like only some of the towns voted for regionalization? Does that mean that, I know that there was a vote earlier, I think in the 80s, where the towns voted on regionalization and one town voted against it, I think Shutesbury, something like that. But so in terms of this effort, you know, if one town did opt out or did vote and vote against it, or two towns, or where does that leave the process?
Then at that point, since we have one board right now, right, which has the 4 towns in it, each has 3 members. And so if we get to the polls and we are horrified to find that we lose a town or 2 at that point, then what happens is those remaining bodies can say, we want to move forward, and then we have to rewrite the regional agreement, we have to rewrite the transition plan, but we've already collected all this data up to this point, but it's not like with budgets right now at the regional level where 3 out of 4 makes it a go. It has to be passing all 4 towns, or then we had just pause and say, okay, well, what we need to do in order to reorganize all this information, get our heads around what does it mean if we only have these 3 towns at this point in the process.
So like the process could still move forward even if one town had opted out of it or voted against it?
It would be a slightly different process because it would have different towns.
But it wouldn't be like coming up for a different vote again, or?
It wouldn't have to come up for
okay.
There are 2 ways that it could go about happening. And one is that either at the March 9th meeting or shortly after the March 9th meeting, if a majority of one of the members from one of the towns determines that they can't support it for whatever reason, then they would pull out at that point, which would be well before a vote, and the other towns would then have to get together and consider whether to go forward. If we did that, it would be before there was a vote. And if that were to happen, you know, it's quite possible that we could end up with a, say, 3-town region, and it would be presented to the voters. Once it gets to the voters, the state statute is pretty clear that it has to be, you're presenting a regional agreement for approval. It's an up or down vote on a regional agreement. It has to be approved in all 4 towns, or all 3 towns if it's 3 towns, whatever the number is. So there's sort of like 2 trigger points,
Right.
not one.
So if it failed in one town, I mean, the 3 remaining towns could always decide to pursue something.
And then we'd start another series of these meetings.
Right.
And
Yeah.
say, what would we do?
And that has happened quite frequently. I mean, the example of this most recent Massachusetts is Air Shirley and Lunenburg, which started out as a 3-town consortium, and Air and Shirley are a successful regional 2-town district now. Lunenburg is on a state on its own.
So I have a comment too, and I realize this is probably outside of, it's too specific probably for the regional agreement, but just in terms of the standardizing across town, across the schools, the elementary schools, looking at the regionalization materials that were presented in the earlier forum, it's clear that, like, I know the question of specials has come up a lot in Amherst recently in the elementary schools, and that the different elementary schools have different levels of specials. Some of the schools have 2 PE classes a week, some have 1. Maybe we would, I realize again that this is a little bit outside the scope, but just in terms of what families and what people may be thinking about in terms of, would this all have to be, as you standardize the curriculum across the schools, would you standardize those type of elements too? One thing that also came up in Amherst is that now Amherst, at the school committee last week, voted to eliminate the short Wednesdays. I know that So it sounded as though that's going forward based on the time of learning study, so Amherst will have full day Wednesdays. The other elementary schools, Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury still have short Wednesdays. So if there was a regional district, would all the schools have to have the same schedule, or would that maybe be an option for families who say, I wanna keep short Wednesdays, those kind of things? So, just like things that I've been thinking about. Thanks, if you have any comments.
Thank you. That's a good question. I mean, Amherst did just do that last week, and I don't know the answer to the Wednesdays in the other towns and what would happen under a regional agreement. I mean, that's certainly something we would have to look into, and, before there was a vote. So, we're just about out of time. Right, so I will take one more comment. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you. So yes, again, I am a Leverett resident, but my question is a general one. And it goes to, I understand with regard to regional agreements and how they're structured, I saw the presentation. I'm sorry I don't have it in paper form, but I understand it is on the website. So there's statutory parameters for how these regional agreements are set up. But I'm wondering if the committee has and or will, at this point, look at other agreements in as close as we can get to a similar situation. For example, maybe the IRE agreement, and be able to provide that information to the public so that, because I'm also a Leverett school committee member, so I'm obviously not involved in this committee, but I'm someone to whom these questions have been coming from all 4 towns, people that I know, and one of the questions is really what can the regional agreement be? So I guess just wondering what has been looked into in terms of what's already out there and what works, and or if that's something going forward, if the committee votes to move forward, is that going to be looked into more?
To give the answers real quickly, yes, we have looked at other regional agreements that have been developed in recent years, and we've been doing it most significantly on issues of governance and school closure, and to see what policies are built into other regional agreements on those 2 issues, because we recognize that those are issues of greatest concern, and have come across some very good ideas. If we go forward, we will continue and probably expand that process, and we will also, at that point, need to use some of the money that we've received from a Department of Elementary and Secondary Education grant to hire an attorney, and we will be looking to hire a law firm that has had significant expertise in helping other districts develop regional agreements so that we can start in an advanced place as possible with that process. And the other hint that I will drop to you, to anyone who's interested in looking at other regional agreements, if you actually go into most district websites, including our own, you will be able to find the regional agreement for that district within there, so that if you're going through the state website and find where it has a list of all the regional districts which are there, and then find the website for that district, you can more often than not find the regional agreement to go with it, and you don't have to do a lot of heavy duty lifting to find it.
So okay.
I have one question too, I'm sorry, I'm also from Shutesbury.
Okay.
I'll be quick.
Thank you. Our last question.
All right, and I appreciate you taking the last question. Dan Hayes, I'm from Shutesbury, I'm also on the Shutesbury School Committee. There's been a lot of discussion this evening about specials in particular, and I have a question. I've attended the regional meetings in both Shutesbury and Leverett. And at the Leverett meeting, it was stated by Julie Shively that Maria Garrick has promised that their adventure program and their greenhouse program would not be cut or impacted by regionalization. And I'm just trying to reconcile that with looking at what's happening through the Amherst system with cutting art, musical, physical education, cutting the technology in the middle school, cutting the physical education in the middle school, looking at Crocker Farm and cutting the after-school program. So how are you able to promise one town that they can keep those programs when you're thinking about equity between all students and parity between all towns?
Thank you for asking that, Dan, because it allows me the opportunity to clarify something.
Okay, thank you.
The Amherst elementary schools are not cutting specials programs. The Amherst elementary schools have cut 20% of some specials teachers' time in the school due to declining enrollment. But kids in the elementary schools will have the same amount of art, music, PE that they've had over the last few years. So I think the word has gotten out somehow that specials were being cut in Amherst, but they are not. In terms of PE and technology at the middle school, the PE program, so there will be some less time in PE for middle school students in order to expand the health program. So PE will now be combined with health, and there will be some more class time in health and somewhat less time in PE. And that's a regional issue now. In terms of technology, the decision around technology in the middle school was to cut the technology class and embed technology in all the curriculum, because the feeling was that was a much more effective way to teach technology. So, and in terms of some of the special programs in the other elementary schools, the greenhouse, et cetera, I number one, I don't sort of see those as specials personally. I see those as sort of the fabric of the culture of that particular elementary school. And the goal of regionalization is not to make the cultures of all the elementary schools the same, but rather to align curriculum and make sure that all kids are on the same page, basically academically, have the same access, the same best practice in terms of instruction, but certainly not to remove unique aspects to each school.
Thank you.
So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. And again, to remind you that there are question forms. If there's a question that you think of now that you want to submit to us, you can also go to the website. I have some questions here that we will put up on the website with answers. So again, thank you very much. I look forward to, if we decide to go forward, more public forums.
I was just gonna mention that on regionalschoolplanning.com, there is, as she indicated, an actual electronic form you can go ahead and fill out and for a question, but also there is the subscription to the one-way mailing list, which was going to be reminding people of Saturday's meeting, for example, and reminded us of this meeting. And there's also a way to write to all the members of the board, the 12-member board, in addition to just the 3 Amherst members if you choose to. And that's all on regionalschoolplanning.com. So please continue to send us your questions and concerns.
And please make sure, if you haven't already, to sign in so that, again, you can get these email reminders and we can inform you of upcoming forums and keep you updated on information.
And also so we can just show somebody came.
That's good.
Yeah. That somebody showed up.
Oh.
That's good. You're already on the list, but you're here too, so that's good.
Yeah. So then